Hello and welcome back for the very first time to the channel. I am Gwynne, and today I'm going to be talking about my favourite reads of 2022. Now I know you're thinking, why is he doing this? It's March. It's a bit late for that, but the reason is, I'll explain myself, is I did a video talking about my top 10 favourite reads with my brother Ed over on the Brothers Gwynne, and I was going to do one for this channel as well, and when I sat down to record it in late January, I thought, it's not really worth it, because there's only one book different on the top 10 list. But now, after dwelling on those books and those reads for a few more months, half this list is different than when I did it back then. I think 4 books, and there's most of the books are in different places, and yeah, number 1 is different as well. And so yeah, that's the thing about books. It's wonderful, they're subjective, and that means over time some of them impact you more, which means some rise up the rankings and some drop down. And so yeah, really looking forward to talking about these. Not talked about a lot of them for a little while, because I'll take any excuse to talk about my favourites. And yeah, me and my brother really took that in January, but back at it again, and I'm going to be talking about my very top 10 favourite reads of 2022. In that number 10th spot, I have All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. So this is an autobiographical set of short stories which is telling the story of James Herriot himself as a vet in Darrowby in the Yorkshire Dales, as I said, in the 1930s, and so in more northern England. And this is just as he became a qualified vet and his first job. And it's really a love letter to his profession, to the people he's around with, and of course to the animals. And I'm an animal lover, and so yeah, this is a book for me. I've absolutely loved the adaptation, the recent programme. And so yeah, I had to read the books, and me and my brother have absolutely loved these. I've read the first 2 or 3 now, and yeah, All Creatures Great and Small is the first one, and I just absolutely loved it. It filled me with a warm feeling. There's some very tense moments, and of course it's sad at other times as well. But mostly this is warm and happy, and it just makes me feel great. And yeah, I smile when I think about it. And you know it's a great book when it evokes so much emotion, even when you're just thinking about it, yet alone when you're actually reading it, immersed in that story. And it is a story, but it's a true one, so that has more impact to it as well. And so yeah, the number 10th spot, I have All Creatures Great and Small. And in the number 9th spot, I have The Children of God and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. This is a debut, and one of the best debuts that I've ever read. Absolutely fantastic. Historical fantasy at its very best. I love the historical fantasy genre, and as I said, this is up there with the best of them. And so yeah, this is written by Shauna Lawless, and it is as a historical inspired. I was finding the words to say it then. So it's inspired by history, and so we are thrust into the politics and the machinations of 10th century Ireland, or very late 10th century Ireland. And that partnered with Irish mythology, and so magic elements come into play, and more specifically the Irish mythology that I mentioned. And so yeah, that is the combination between historical fiction and fantasy, which combines to make the great genre, in my opinion anyway, of historical fantasy. And Shauna Lawless does a great job blending the two, where the magic and the peoples feel very real, and it's a very immersive story filled with tension. And leading the story, we have 2 POVs, 2 female characters who are leading POVs and are sole POVs, and they're very different, but they both have to engage in a world, a patriarchal society dominated by men, and they have to get agency through their own intelligence. And it's a brilliant commentary on society of the day, and it's very tense, but I love how clever it is. And as I said, these women have to use their intelligence to reach their means. And one of them is she's trying to protect her son, and she does some pretty dark things, but I love how there's the question of, is this for her son, or does she have deeper, darker motives that she won't even admit to herself? And then we have another perspective who's a bit nicer overall, but they both have to do things and be quite clever and also quite deceitful at times as well. And so I thought this is very interesting, combining kind of the military nature of the time and combining it with the political nature as well, and the machinations that go on in the background that we mere mortals do not see. And so I love kind of the combination of those. And there is a full review with some deeper, more insightful thoughts that I did with my brother Ed over on the Brothers Gwynne. And so yeah, if you're interested, you want to check this out, or if you've read it and you feel a bit nostalgic when people talk about it, head over and watch that. But yeah, my number 9th favourite read of 2022 is The Children of God and Fighting Men. And as I said, it's one of the best debuts I've ever read. And book 2 is one of my most anticipated reads of 2023. series. So yeah, do definitely get on to read this because book 2 is coming this year. And so yeah, that is my number 9 favourite read of 2022. And in the number 8 spot, I have a titan of the fantasy genre, and that is A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. And I don't know why I sung that. I really don't know why I sung that. But anyway, last year I said it was the year of George R.R. Martin for me because I read for the first time books 1, 2 and 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire, and also Fire and Blood. And I watched season 1 of A Game of Thrones for the first time, and I also watched House of the Dragon, so there's a lot of George R. R. Martin stuff going on that I introduced myself to in 2022. I'm about 10 years behind or 15 years behind most people, but I did it, okay, I finally got there. And so Game of Thrones, this kicks off, of course, the series of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I thought it was brilliant. I love kind of the character development. They are at the core of the story. I'm a character-driven reader. You've probably heard me say it 100 times on the channel if you followed it for a little while. But yeah, I'm a character-driven reader, and that is what this story is driven by. Of course, there is the kind of the epic scope of a fantasy tale in the background, but when you look at it, there aren't actually many action sequences. A lot of them happen off-page, but in a way that's still very satisfying. And as I said, a lot more of it is about the politics, the machinations, the twists and turns, the revelations, the preparations for conflict, and the consequences as well. And so, yeah, I really love that. It's a very different type of fantasy, which is interesting, having read more contemporary fantasy, and then going back to this, where I kind of see the inspirations, but most people would have read the Game of Thrones and then seen how other writers are inspired. And so, yeah, I think I've missed quite a lot of what people have been inspired by in other books, but it's very interesting looking back now on some of my favourite fantasy books and kind of seeing maybe little nods to A Game of Thrones, what they've been inspired by. And so it's very interesting. It's a book that really can kind of change your look on the genre as a whole because of course, George R. R. Martin has been so instrumental to the evolution of fantasy, and it's brought so many new readers to the genre as well, which of course all us fantasy lovers should be very thankful for. Even if the series is not finished, there's still stuff to be happy about. And yeah, I think even though of course we'd love the series to be finished, myself as a new reader and those poor people have been waiting so many years for the next book, but I think we're still happy. We can still be happy that we've had the books in the first place. And so yeah, that is A Game of Thrones, my 8th favourite book of 2022. Another one that I've got a review on with my brother Ed on the Brothers Gwynne channel. And so yeah, again, if you want to see my more insightful thoughts, go check that out. But also, if you want to hear some awesome readings of A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings in a review format, followed by a review, go check out Mike Book Reviews' channel. He does a great job with his openings. I wish I could edit like that. But yeah, that's an aspiration. But yeah, he does a great job. And yeah, go head over and watch that if you want to kind of feel the atmosphere and immersion of A Game of Thrones. But now, next up, into my 7th favourite read of 2022, and that is A False Hope by Mike Shackle, book 2 of the Last War trilogy. And it's one of my favourite series of all time. So book 3 was in between my 10th and 20th favourite reads of 2022, and book 2 is in my top 10. Hence why I'm talking about it right now. And We Are the Dead I've read in 2021, and that's one of my favourite books of all time as well. What a book this is. It really takes it. A lot of people say, oh, if you love Abercrombie, read this, which I do agree about, but don't go into it thinking, oh, it's going to be like Abercrombie. It's not as witty. And there is a bit more hope in the sense that there are some characters who, they are actually obviously nice people. They're very flawed and complex, and I love that, but they're still nice people. Whereas in The First Law, we hope they're nice people, but you're never sure. There's always kind of a dark corner of their mind lurking that either they're outright nasty or there's that lingering where you think, they're still not really a nice person as such. They can do nice things. But as I said, there's some characters here who are obviously good, but then you've got others who are kind of straddling the line between good and evil. Of course, it's not as simple as that. And I love how Mike Shackle kind of discusses the idea of the greater good, and does doing terrible things for the greater good does that make it worse? Is that because the premise of this, I should say, is that imagine if Sauron won and he took the Shire. So this is about cities rising up against people. So they've been recently conquered and they're rising up. And so very fresh fantasy idea, and it's written really well, as I said, with complex characters. And every single chapter has an event that it's circled around, where it's not necessarily action, but something integral to the story. And it makes it feel like such a fast-paced, immersive, engaging and entrancing read. And yeah, it's just impossible to put this book down. And yeah, I just absolutely love it. And it's one of those that is not talked about enough on BookTube. It needs to be picked up more. And yeah, it's a gross injustice that more people aren't picking this up. And so yeah, I've taken it as a mission, spread the word, get more people to read Mike Shackle's books. I'm really happy that Mike's Book Reviews has picked up We Are the Dead recently, and I hope he loves the rest of the trilogy as well. And yeah, Fool's Hope, absolutely brilliant, and a lot of twists and turns in this second instalment that are absolutely fantastic, where it's hard to have a surprise while still being satisfying to the readers, but Mike Shackle found the perfect line, and he struck gold with A Fool's Hope. Next up in the number 6 spot, I have The Wolf Den, some historical fiction, but I usually read military historical fiction, but this is not that. This is very different. The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, book 1 of the Wolf Den trilogy, which will be concluded in 2023, and I absolutely loved it, hence why it's my 6th favourite book of 2022. It's one that is very powerful, very hard-hitting. It's not for the faint of heart. It's about a woman called Amara who is made a slave in Greece and brought to be forced to work in a brothel in Pompeii. And it is about her as a sole perspective, but also the women around her, how they conflict, how they rely on each other in times of conflict, and yeah, how they're really affected by their own past, how it's really shaped them into who they are today, and how it shapes also how they react. Some of them still have hope, even if they think themselves as naive. They still have that element of hope and that burning desire to get out of the situation. Then others have just given up, and they're just not going to try anything. And others have accepted that they're going to be in this situation. They're not going to try to escape, but they're going to try and make the best of a horrendous situation. And so yeah, it's really interesting seeing kind of that range of psychologies, and Elodie Harper does a brilliant job exploring the human condition, really. And I've done a full review for The Wolf Den on the channel. I think it was my first review actually on this channel, and so yeah, that's where I talk about this kind of idea in a bit more depth over there. But yeah, I think that Elodie Harper really brings the perfect prose style to this story. It's a bit like Pat Barker with what she brought to The Silence of the Girls, where when these terrible things are happening, she doesn't highlight it by more extreme prose. It just shows that this is their daily life. This is a regular occurrence, and it makes it so much more impactful that it's just told with kind of a stony exterior. And yeah, it really makes it really impactful. It shows that Elodie Harper is fantastic at her craft. She's not only thought of an engaging story that really hooks the reader and kept me from the very first page to the last, but she's also a brilliant writer. She uses language and prose to really kind of shape the story, explore the themes, and increase the tension, and really result in a huge climactic ending, which evokes so much emotion in the ending and throughout the entire story. And so yeah, Elodie Harper, really respect her as a writer, not just because of the fantastic cast of characters she's created, because not only is the main character brilliant, she's found a way to make sure that no character is left behind. They all have a spotlight at some point, and they really flourish under that. Not necessarily in a positive way in the sense of a happy scene, but really flourish in the sense of bringing the character to life, and that character development, the character interactions, the dynamics, and the dialogue is just fantastic, where there's a lot of subtext coming into the play, and it's very subtle, which I love in a story where the author trusts in the reader to pick up on what is going on, but you're not told everything, so there's hooks and mysteries that you find out throughout the story. And so yeah, The Wolf Den, can't say enough good about this story, and I cannot wait to carry on with this series. And so yeah, that is The Wolf Den, my 6th favourite read of 2022. In the number 5th spot, I have another George R.R. Martin book, and that is A Storm of Swords, book 3, a lot of people's favourite instalment of the books. This is where a lot of what's been built towards has just kicked off. A lot of crazy scenes, action sequences, twists and turns, revelations, murders, deaths, betrayals, backstabs, and so on and so forth. Everything we love in a Song of Ice and Fire book, eh? And so yeah, that is A Storm of Swords. It's absolutely brilliant in that sense. I've done a short talking about why I love this series, and well, this book, I mean. Obviously I can't talk about the whole series in a minute, that'd be pretty hard, but yeah, I talked about this book and why I loved it in a minute, which was quite hard, but yeah, I plan on doing a full review at some point soon, like I did for A Clash of Kings recently. And so yeah, Storm of Swords, the 3rd installment of the series, and the 2nd book that I'm talking about by George R.R. Martin in this video. I won't go over too much of it, because it's basically why I love A Game of Thrones, but highlighted even more, because I think some of the characters shine a lot more, and there's a greater cast here, and as I said, it's where everything's kicking off. Game of Thrones is brilliant, but I prefer this because it's where you see it's very rewarding and the payoff from everything that's been built up in what is a very big book in this, which is 1,300 pages, in Game of Thrones, which I think is 700-800 pages, and Clash of Kings is pretty huge as well. And yeah, I wish there were more pages, but yeah, it shows that a lot is built towards these moments where it really kicks off. And so yeah, Storm of Swords, brilliant, my 5th favourite read of 2022, and I'm already looking forward to a reread. And then in the number 4 spot, a book that I read my brother's copy, and so I don't have it to hand physically, and that is historical fiction, and it is Gates of Fire. No, the in front of it, but Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, and this is a standalone, which I absolutely love. We don't have enough standalones in historical fiction or fantasy, but Gates of Fire is a brilliant one, and it is about the tale of Thermopylae, or 300, and as it's perhaps better known by nowadays. But yeah, the tale of the Spartans and a few others. It wasn't just the Spartans standing against the huge ranks of 1 million of the Persian army. Of course, we don't know the exact figure, but it's a pretty huge army, and one of the greatest that have been amassed by that point. And so yeah, this is the kind of Greco-Persian wars, and this, I love how the Gates of Fire takes an intimate story at the heart. We've got a character who is a chronicler's tale. He's telling his part in the story, and he's telling the Persians as he's been captured after Thermopylae, and so he's telling his role, and he's not a Spartan, but he's there. And I won't say too much how, because that would spoil the story. But you've got that intimate story, which has got kind of a theme of vengeance, belonging, identity, and coming of age, a Bildungsroman as well. But of course, on top of that more intimate arc, you've got the epic story of the grander war, of the causes and the consequences, what it would go on to mean and signify, and why the story has echoed down the generations. Millennium later, we are still discussing it as one of the craziest events of history, and what it signifies as well. It's very powerful, where I think Stephen Pressfield does a brilliant job of not romanticising it, because it's important not to romanticise war, I believe so anyway, and he doesn't romanticize it. He shows the brutality. He shows the faults of the Spartan state and the Greek states, not showing them as kind of these idealized heroes standing to protect the world, because they weren't. They were trying to protect their interests and their life and their people. But at the same time, there's a philosophical edge, because the Spartan troops, this philosophy, this stoicism that was so prevalent in that culture, and the idea of sacrificing yourself for the greater good. I find that so interesting. I talked about, when I was saying about a fool's hope, about the idea of the greater good, but this is a very different spin on it. We're talking about, is it worth sacrificing yourself for an ideal that is greater than yourself, and what that means and the purpose it gives to individuals. It's very powerful, it's very evocative, and it's very thought-provoking as well, and that's why Gates of Fire is in a bit of a different league to most books, because it's entertaining and you love reading it at the time, but long after you've closed that final page, you're still thinking about it. You're thinking about the questions that it poses, and you're thinking, what are the answers? Is it worth it? And the idea of purpose as well. It's very important with the themes it kind of establishes and discusses. At least I thought so anyway. And it's really stayed with me. It's been very impactful, and I think about Gates of Fire pretty often, and that's one of the reasons why it's up there with my favourite books of 2022, alongside the brilliant writing style, where as soon as you read this, within a few pages, you just know this is going to be a book for you. Well, you get that with a few books, don't you? And this was one for me, and hopefully for you if you do pick it up, or if you've read it already. I did do a review of this with my brother Ed on the Brothers Gwynne, but yeah, Gates of Fire is one of those books that does everything brilliantly, and on top of great storytelling, great characters, great action, and so on and so forth, it's got that thought-provoking philosophical edge as well, which partnered together, absolutely brilliant, and I loved it. In the number 3rd spot, we're getting to the big guns now, the final top 3, and to kick that off, I've got Empire of the Vampire by Joey Christoph. This is a special edition because I love the book so much, I had to get the special edition, and on the back it says, "One day as a lion is worth 10,000 as a lamb," a brilliant quote from this fantastic story, which takes the kind of fantasy element of vampires in a very different direction. Empire of the Vampire is a chronicler's tale, as we're seeing different time periods where we have Gabriel de Leon, sole perspective, telling the story. He's being interviewed, he's been captured, and he's being interviewed by a vampire, which you may see the inspiration by a film there. And he's telling the story of when he was a teenager, and he was taken to this school, and it takes kind of the sword school trope in a very different, fresh direction whilst keeping what we love about it. It subverts a lot of your expectations, but I absolutely love how that is built, because a phenomenon called day's death has occurred, and that means that the sun does not shine quite as brightly, and as you would expect, that has caused environmental crises. A lot of crops won't grow, people are having to find different ways to live, but there's droughts and there's severe environmental consequences to this happening. But as if things weren't bad enough already, it also means vampires can walk about in broad daylight, which is just harsh, really, as if anything else couldn't go wrong. And so it's very interesting kind of seeing it's J. Kristoff thinking what would happen if vampires could do that. Nothing is holding them back. And so humanity is kind of retreating and retreating as more and more die, and the population is becoming smaller and smaller and retreating more and more as the vampires kind of get more of the undead to their army, and they're just pushing forward and forward and slowly but surely gain dominion over the world. And I won't say more than that, because part of this story is about finding out everything that happens. Gabriel de Leon is a character who can be very infuriating, but not annoying, because he's infuriating in the sense of his character, what he's been through, his actions. He makes some terrible choices, but not in a way that really annoyed me. I know some readers, it did annoy them, so maybe this is not a book for everyone, but to me, it made me believe in his character more. It was like I wanted to shake him and tell him to do something else, but it felt believable at the same time. It wasn't just done for the sake of it. At least that's my opinion. Anyway, and so Empire of the Vampire I thought was absolutely fantastic. J. Kristoff, very distinctive style, which will either click with you or won't. Some books, like perhaps The Wolf Den, I would say most people will really enjoy this or be engaged by it, and I'd recommend it to most people. I wouldn't recommend this to most people, but it's one of those that if you enjoy it, you will love it. I think so. Anyway, it could become one of your favourites. I still recommend to many people to pick this up, because it could be your new favourite read. But I'd also say if you've read 20-30 pages and you're not enjoying it, I think it's alright not to push on. Just give up there. It's not going to be a book for you. But yeah, luckily for me, it was a book for me. And some absolutely fantastic quotes in here. J. Kristoff has a beautiful writing style, which is quite stripped back, but then he has little flourishes of beautiful description and imagery at times, which is at the forefront. And it's just fantastic how he creates a scene using kind of those contrasting kind of writing styles, where it's stripped back and then he has a little paragraph, a little line that is just absolutely beautiful. And yeah, I thought it was brilliant writing, brilliant story, and I cannot wait for book 2. And so yeah, that is my third favourite read of 2022. And now on to my number 2 spot, and that is the third book I'm going to be talking about, written by George R. R. Martin. I'm sorry if that bores you, but I couldn't not have all 3 on here, and that is A Clash of Kings, book 2 of A Song of Ice and Fire. And I've done a review very recently on the channel of A Clash of Kings, and I absolutely love it. This is a book where Tyrion, I heard, was one of the greatest characters of all time, and A Game of Thrones I thought is really good, but he's one of the only elements I was a little disappointed in, because it didn't reach my expectations, which albeit were very high. But in A Clash of Kings, he hit his mark. This is Tyrion's book, and he becomes one of my top 10 favourite characters of all time. And yeah, everyone was right. I was wrong to doubt everyone. After I read book 1, I was like, really? But yeah, I was very wrong to doubt them. And A Clash of Kings is where his character really hits off, in my opinion, and is absolutely fantastic. Not just Tyrion, but the other storylines as well. And whilst the Storm of Swords is where you get kind of the payoff as all these rewarding moments happen that have been built towards for the first 3 books, I just prefer The Clash of Kings for some reason. Every single page I found so engaging and entertaining. And of course Tyrion, I think, being given his chance, he's been made... Oh, I won't say actually, because it would be a spoiler if you've not watched A Game of Thrones. But he's been given a role of importance, I shall say. And it's him making... Will he make the most of it? What can he craft here? Is it a job for him? Can he find purpose? And amongst everything else that he has to face, what troubles are going to be thrown at him here? But then you've got the other perspectives. Jon does a bit more than he does in Game of Thrones. And I love how kind of this is where the action, the war, actually begins. And yeah, it's really engaging. George R. R. Martin's a fantastic writer, and that's why it's my second favourite book of 2022. I'm really looking forward to carrying on with A Song of Ice and Fire in 2023. But now, on to my very favourite read of the year. And that is a book I don't have physically, because I read it, my brother's copy, and I gave it back to him recently. And that is Dreaming the Eagle by Amanda Scott. We're doing a read-along of the Boudica Quartet. on the Brothers Gwynne beginning in March. So book 1 March, book 2 April, book 3 May, and the finale of the quartet in June. And so it's not too late to join us. We're chatting about it on Discord, and we're also going to be doing individual reviews for each book at the end of each month. And so Dreaming the Eagle, absolutely loved it. It's historical fiction based on the historical figure, as you may have guessed, of Boudica. And so I know a bit about Boudica, but not a huge amount. So it's really interesting finding out a bit more. And this is a story that feels very epic and a bit like fantasy how epic it is, even though it's historical fiction. But it's got a very small cast of characters that it really focuses on. It's a character-driven story that looks at those interactions, those dynamics and those relationships, how they evolve and collapse as well over time. And also it's a Bildungsroman. We're following two characters who are siblings, and we join them when I think one is 8 and one is 12, and we follow them into adulthood. And as I said, it's a Bildungsroman, and so if you're not keen on the Bildungsromans or coming of age stories, book 1 may not be your favourite, but it follows them into adulthood, so it's not the whole time. So I still think that you'd really enjoy this book, and it's definitely worth checking out. If you're primarily a fantasy reader, this is the historical fiction series I would recommend alongside Bernard Cornwell's The Warlord Chronicles series, because it does feel so epic in its scale and what it's including. And I won't say any more because it's not fantasy, but it's got elements that feel like fantasy, and it's so hard to say them without providing spoilers, so I won't even try. It will just end up confusing everybody. But yeah, Dreaming the Eagle is my very favourite read of 2022. Thank you so much to everyone who's watched this video. Hopefully you check out some of these books. Hopefully I've intrigued you in a few of the books I've talked about. Let me know what some of your favourites of 2022 were. Let me know if you're still thinking about them. Has your list changed a lot since we begun 2023? Because mine most certainly has. If you watch my video on the Brothers Gwynne, you'll see how many books are different now. And that's very interesting how our opinions of books alter and change over time. But yeah, everyone, thank you so much for watching. That's my list for my favourites of 2022. And as I said, thanks for watching. Let me know yours in the comments below. And everyone, thanks for watching and stay safe.